I don't care what the manual says. I want that engine cowling open 5 minutes ago, and I want a diagnostic running that tells me something other than system error. Do you understand me? Kyle's voice was a blade, sharp and sterile, cutting through the humid air of the tarmac. It was a voice accustomed to obedience, polished by management seminars and inflated by the small kingdom he ruled here on the ground. He was the afternoon's lead operations coordinator, a title he wore with the same stiff pride as his ridiculously crisp, navy blue uniform. The uniform, he felt, was a suit of armor, deflecting incompetence and broadcasting authority. It was so new it still smelled of the factory plastic. Below him, on the shimmering asphalt, a team of mechanics swarmed around the port engine of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, their movements a frantic ballet of futility. The aircraft, a marvel of carbon composite and fly-by-wire technology, sat inert and silent. It was a cathedral of modern firepower rendered useless by a ghost in its own machine. Kyle tapped impatiently on the screen of his tablet, a device he wielded like a scepter. The diagnostic report was a cascade of red warnings and nonsensical error codes. It was an electronic shrug. He hated it. Technology was supposed to provide answers, not riddles. It was supposed to be clean, logical, absolute. This was messy. This was an affront. He looked from the useless data to the faces of the passengers, their forms pressed against the terminal glass like a silent, accusing mural. Their frustration radiated across the tarmac, a palpable wave of inconvenience that was a direct stain on his performance review. Among them, set slightly apart from the anxious herd, sat an old man. Samuel Vance was 86 years old, and he moved with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a glacier. His hands, resting on his knees, were a road map of a life lived long and hard, the knuckles swollen like old walnuts, the skin a fine parchment crisscrossed with scars and liver spots. He wore a simple tweed jacket, threadbare at the elbows, and gray flannel trousers. He was a relic, a sepia-toned photograph in a world of high-definition digital screens. He was not looking at Kyle. He was not looking at the frantic mechanics. His gaze, calm and impossibly patient, was fixed on the silent engine. He saw not a complex system of integrated circuits and fuel injectors, but a heart that had stopped beating. His head was tilted slightly, as if listening for a sound no one else could hear, a phantom rhythm beneath the panicked shouting and the distant whine of other, luckier jets. Kyle's eyes flicked over to him, a brief, dismissive glance. Just another passenger, probably confused. Senile, maybe. He hated when the elderly traveled alone. They got lost. They held up the security line. They were analog problems in his digital world. He dismissed the old man from his thoughts as easily as closing an unwanted pop-up window. What's the status on the auxiliary power unit? Kyle barked into his radio, his voice tight with manufactured control. Did you cycle it? Cycle it again. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result, but right now, insanity is all we've got. He thought that was a rather clever line. He made a mental note to use it again. Inside the terminal, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and communal anxiety. Samuel felt the subtle shift in the room's energy as the delay stretched from an inconvenience into an event. He watched the young man in the crisp uniform strut and shout, his posture a study in brittle arrogance. Samuel had seen men like him before. They were the lieutenants who read the field manual but had never smelled cordite, the quartermasters who knew the inventory but not the cost. They mistook authority for wisdom. He had seen men like him die because of that mistake. The thought was not malicious. It was a simple, weathered fact, like a smooth stone in the riverbed of his memory. Slowly, deliberately, Samuel stood. The movement was a quiet unfolding. He placed his palms flat on his knees, pushed himself upright, and took a moment to let his balance settle. Every motion was economical, stripped of any wasted energy. He picked up his single, small carry-on bag, a canvas satchel from a forgotten decade, and began to walk. His path was not toward the gate agent or the customer service desk. He walked toward the large window overlooking the tarmac, his worn leather shoes making no sound on the polished floor. He bypassed the agitated clusters of business travelers and complaining families, his quiet passage almost unnoticed. He stopped at the glass, his reflection a faint ghost superimposed over the drama outside. He saw the young manager, Kyle, stabbing his finger at the tablet. He saw the mechanics, their faces slick with sweat and frustration, pulling panels off the engine cowling, revealing the intricate, terrifying guts of the machine. They were like surgeons operating on a patient whose anatomy they had only ever studied in a book. Samuel's eyes narrowed. He was not looking at the whole engine. He was looking at one specific area, near the primary fuel intake manifold. He saw a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the heat haze rising from the tarmac. A distortion. A tiny leak, so small it wouldn't register on a pressure sensor, but just large enough to throw the delicate air-fuel mixture into chaos, telling the engine's electronic brain to shut down before it tore itself apart. It was a familiar ghost. He had seen it before, in the bitter cold of a Korean winter, on an F-86 Sabre with an engine that refused to roar. He turned from the window and walked toward the door leading to the jet bridge, a door marked in bold red letters, "Authorized personnel only." Kyle saw the movement out of the corner of his eye. The old man. He had left the window and was now shuffling, impossibly slowly, toward the restricted access door. A flicker of irritation sparked into a flame of righteous indignation. "Hey! You! Grandpa!" Kyle shouted, his voice amplified by the open space of the tarmac. "This is a restricted area. Get back behind the glass." Samuel did not stop. He did not acknowledge the shout. He simply continued his slow, measured walk, as if drawn by an invisible string. He reached the door and, with a gentle push, found it unlocked, left ajar in the crew's haste. He stepped through, into the covered tunnel of the jet bridge. The audacity of it. The sheer, senile nerve. "Security!" Kyle bellowed into his radio. "We have an unauthorized civilian on the jet bridge. A passenger. Elderly male. Intercept and remove." He strode toward the jet bridge entrance, his polished shoes clicking in angry rhythm on the concrete. This was the last thing he needed. A security incident. More paperwork. More delays. All because some old fossil had wandered off. He rehearsed the speech he would give the men, a stern, condescending lecture on rules, safety, and the importance of listening to one's betters. He met Samuel halfway down the enclosed ramp. The old man had stopped, his hand resting lightly on the cool metal wall, his breathing even, his eyes clear. He did not look lost or confused. He looked resolute. "Sir," Kyle began, forcing a tone of strained patience, the kind one uses for a child or a simpleton. "You cannot be here. This is a secure zone. You need to go back to the terminal waiting area right now." Samuel's eyes, the color of a washed-out winter sky, met Kyle's. They were eyes that had seen the curvature of the earth from 40,000 feet and the stark, frozen landscape of the chosen reservoir. They held no fear, no defiance, only a deep, unnerving calm. "The fuel mixture is off," Samuel said. His voice was quiet, raspy with age, yet it carried a strange weight. "You have a microleak in the number 3 atomizer nozzle." Kyle stared. He actually stared. The old man's statement was so specific, so absurdly technical, that it short-circuited Kyle's brain for a full second. Then, the condescension came flooding back, stronger than ever, mixed with a surge of angry disbelief. "He thinks he's a mechanic. This fossil. He probably thinks the plane runs on steam and good intentions." A laugh, sharp and mocking, escaped Kyle's lips. "A microleak in the atomizer nozzle. Is that right? Did you read that in a book from the 1950s? Sir, this is a GEnx 1B engine. It has a fully digitized fuel management system with over 1,000 diagnostic sensors. If there was a leak, believe me, my $5,000 tablet would know about it." He brandished the tablet as if to prove his point. "The sensors are looking for a pressure drop," Samuel stated, his tone flat, factual, not argumentative. "They aren't calibrated for a vapor phase leak that only manifests under initial pressurization. The fuel vaporizes before it can register as a liquid drip. It's an air-to-fuel ratio fault, not a pressure fault. The computer sees it as an anomaly and initiates a safety shutdown." The words hung in the air between them. They were precise, confident, and utterly incomprehensible to Kyle in their practical application. He knew the terms, of course. He'd seen them in training modules. But this old man spoke of them as if he knew them intimately, as if they were old friends. The sheer gall of it stoked Kyle's fury. He was being lectured by a museum exhibit. In front of his crew. "Okay, that's enough," Kyle snapped, his professional veneer cracking to reveal the petty tyrant beneath. "I don't have time for this fantasy. You are interfering with a critical flight operation. I'm ordering you to return to the terminal immediately, or I will have you escorted out of the airport." Samuel did not move. He simply looked past Kyle, his gaze fixed on the silent engine at the end of the jet bridge. "I can fix it," he said softly. That was it. That was the final straw. The statement was so preposterous, so utterly divorced from reality, that Kyle felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. This wasn't just a confused old man, this was a delusional one. A dangerous one. "You can fix it," Kyle repeated, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. You can fix a $100 million aircraft with what, exactly? A hearing aid and a hard candy. The mechanics on the tarmac had paused their work, drawn by the confrontation. They were watching. The passengers were still at the windows, their faces indistinct but their attention palpable. Kyle was on a stage, and this old fool was trying to steal his scene, to undermine his authority. "I'm giving you one last chance, old man. Turn around and walk away," Kyle said, his voice low and menacing. He took a step closer, invading Samuel's personal space. Samuel stood his ground. His calm was a wall against which Kyle's arrogance crashed and broke. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket. The movement was so gentle, so lacking in threat, yet Kyle flinched as if expecting a weapon. Instead, Samuel's hand emerged with a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he carefully extracted a single, strange object. It was a thin piece of steel, no thicker than a guitar string, about 6 inches long, with one end bent into a tiny, precise hook. The other end was wrapped in frayed, blackened tape. It looked like a piece of junk, a forgotten bit of wire from a long-dead project. "What is that?" Kyle demanded, his eyes wide with a mixture of suspicion and disgust. "Is that a tool? You can't bring unauthorized tools into a sterile area. That is a major security violation." He saw his opening. This was concrete. This was a rule he could enforce. "Hand it over," Kyle commanded. "That is now evidence." Samuel's fingers tightened around the piece of steel. His thumb stroked the frayed tape, a familiar, comforting gesture. His eyes took on a distant look. For a fleeting moment, he was not on a sterile jet bridge in the 21st century. He was in the screaming, frigid wind whipping across a makeshift runway in North Korea. The air was filled with the smell of burning oil and fear. A fellow pilot, a boy of 19 named Jimmy, was bleeding out in the cockpit of his Saberjet, and the engine. The engine was choking, just like this one. The memory was a physical blow, a ghost of cold that pricked his skin. "No," Samuel said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. It was a mountain. "No." Kyle sputtered, incredulous. "Did you just say no to me?" His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. The humiliation was total. He took out his radio, his hand trembling with rage. "Security, this is Coordinator Evans. The passenger is non-compliant and carrying a prohibited item. I need immediate physical removal. Now." He had crossed the Rubicon. He had committed. The old man would be dragged out, a public spectacle that would reassert Kyle's dominance. But not everyone on the tarmac saw a delusional old man. Down below, leaning against the landing gear, was Air Force Reservist Sergeant Michael Davis. He was a young mechanic, barely 25, but he had done a tour in Afghanistan working on aging C-130s, the workhorses of the fleet. He had been watching the confrontation with a growing sense of unease. He had seen the old man's walk, the economy of his movements. He had seen the way his eyes scanned the engine, not with the confused gaze of a layman, but with the focused assessment of a diagnostician. And he had seen the tool. It wasn't a piece of junk. It was a go-no-go gauge. A custom-made probe. Davis had seen old master sergeants, lifers who had forgotten more about engines than he would ever know, carry tools just like that. Tools they had made themselves in a machine shop 50 years ago to solve a problem the engineers in their climate-controlled offices had never anticipated. They were talismans of experience. And he saw the look in the old man's eyes when the coordinator demanded it. It was a look of quiet, profound ownership. It was the look of a man protecting not a tool, but a piece of his own soul. A cold dread washed over Davis. His boss was publicly humiliating a legend. He didn't know who the old man was, but he knew, with the certainty of a soldier recognizing a general in civilian clothes, that they were making a terrible, terrible mistake. He pulled out his personal cell phone, his fingers fumbling on the screen. He had a number. A break glass in case of emergency number. It belonged to his former commanding officer, a Colonel Westbrook at nearby Peterson Air Force Base. He had been told never to use it unless someone's life was on the line. This, Davis decided, felt close enough. He shielded the phone with his body and pressed the call button. Westbrook, a gruff voice answered on the first ring. "Colonel, it's Sergeant Davis, sir." "Mike Davis. I'm sorry to bother you, I'm at Denver International," he began, his voice low and urgent. "Davis. What's wrong?" The colonel's voice sharpened with concern. "Sir, there's a situation here. A civilian flight is grounded, engine trouble. There's an old man. An old-timer, sir. He tried to tell the ground coordinator what was wrong, and they're about to have him arrested." "A lot of people think they're experts, Sergeant," Westbrook said, his tone skeptical. "No, sir, not like this," Davis insisted, his voice cracking with urgency. "The way he moves, the way he looked at the engine. He's one of us, sir. A real one. An old-school crew chief, I'd bet my life on it." He pulled out a custom probe, a wire tool, and the coordinator, this civilian kid, he's trying to take it from him. "Sir. I think this is a mistake we're gonna read about in the papers." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Davis could hear the faint sound of typing. "What does he look like, this old man?" 80, maybe older. Tweed jacket. Gray trousers. Blue eyes. Walks slow, but steady. "Sir, he's calm. Too calm. Like he's seen it all before." Another pause, longer this time. The typing stopped. When Colonel Westbrook spoke again, his voice had changed. It was tight, strained, laced with something that sounded like awe. "Sergeant, what did you say he was holding?" "A piece of wire, sir. Bent into a hook. Wrapped in old tape. A sharp intake of breath on the other end." "Oh, my God," Westbrook whispered. "Davis, what is your exact location?" Davis gave him the gate and runway number. "Listen to me very carefully, Sergeant," the colonel's voice was now a steel whip. "Stall them. Do whatever you have to do. Create a diversion. Spill something. Fake a seizure. I don't care. You have to buy me 10 minutes. Do not, under any circumstances, let them touch that man. Is that clear?" "Sir? Who is he?" Davis asked, his heart pounding. "You're about to find out, Sergeant. Now go." The line went dead. Up on the jet bridge, 2 burly airport security guards had arrived. They flanked Kyle, their presence exuding a placid, bureaucratic menace. "Sir, please come with us," the first guard said, his voice a monotone drone. Samuel did not look at them. He looked only at Kyle. His calm was beginning to unnerve the young manager, chipping away at his self-righteous fury, leaving behind a thin residue of doubt. Why wasn't he scared? Why wasn't he yelling? "This is your final opportunity to comply," Kyle said, his voice a little less steady now. Down on the tarmac, Sergeant Davis took a deep breath. He looked at a nearby cart loaded with cans of hydraulic fluid. He ran towards it, shouting. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. We've got a spill here. Major spill." He deliberately kicked the leg of the cart, sending a dozen cans clattering across the concrete. A thick, viscous liquid began to pool near the nose gear of the plane. The diversion worked. Half the ground crew, and one of the security guards, turned toward the new commotion. But Kyle's focus was absolute. He would not be distracted. This was about him and the old man. "Get him," Kyle ordered the remaining guard. The guard reached out a hand to take Samuel's arm. The instant his fingers were about to make contact, a sound sliced through the air, a sound utterly alien to the commercial airport environment. It was the piercing, unmistakable shriek of multiple military-grade sirens. Every head on the tarmac, in the terminal, on the jet bridge, snapped toward the source. A convoy of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, flanked by 2 airport police cruisers, was racing down a service road at a speed that defied all regulations. They didn't slow. They drove directly onto the active taxiway, their lights flashing, scattering a baggage train like startled birds. They screeched to a halt less than 50 feet from the wing of the grounded Dreamliner. The doors flew open. United States Air Force security forces, clad in full tactical gear and carrying rifles, spilled out, forming a crisp, intimidating perimeter. They moved with a lethal, synchronized grace that made the airport security guards look like clumsy amateurs. The last door to open was the rear door of the center Suburban. Out stepped a man in the immaculate dress uniform of a United States Air Force general. 3 silver stars glittered on each shoulder. His name tag read, Thompson. His face was granite, his posture ramrod straight. He was the physical embodiment of authority, an authority so profound it made Kyle's managerial title seem like a child's crayon drawing. General Thompson's eyes scanned the scene for a fraction of a second. They swept over the plane, the mechanics, the manufactured spill, and landed on the tableau on the jet bridge. He saw Kyle, puffed up and red-faced. He saw the security guard, hand outstretched. And he saw the old man. The general's face, already grim, hardened into a mask of cold fury. He ignored Kyle completely. He walked past him as if he were a piece of luggage, a ghost, an irrelevant obstruction. His polished black shoes struck the metal floor of the jet bridge with heavy, rhythmic thuds that echoed like drumbeats announcing a verdict. He walked directly to Samuel Vance. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of him. In the sudden, deafening silence, he brought his heels together with a sharp crack. His right hand snapped up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cut glass. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a superior. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect. Master Sergeant Vance, the general's voice boomed, sharp and clear, resonating through the jet bridge and out onto the tarmac. General Mark Thompson, sir. It is an honor. Sir. The word hung in the air, electric and impossible. A 3-star general had called this shuffling old man, sir. Kyle felt the blood drain from his face. His mouth went dry. The tablet suddenly felt impossibly heavy in his hand, a monument to his own stupidity. The security guard snatched his hand back as if he had tried to touch a live wire. Samuel slowly, very slowly, raised his head and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. General, he acknowledged, his voice still quiet. General Thompson held his salute for a long, respectful moment before dropping his hand. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the small, taped wire still clutched in Samuel's hand. The ghost's toothpick, the general said, his voice now filled with a deep, resonant awe. I've read the reports. I've seen the photographs. I never thought I'd see it in person. He turned his full attention back to the stunned audience, his eyes sweeping over Kyle, the security guards, and the mechanics below. You people have any idea who you were about to lay hands on, he thundered. The question was not a question. It was an accusation. No one moved. No one breathed. This is Master Sergeant Samuel Vance, the general announced, his voice ringing with the power of a historical proclamation. To you, he looks like an old man. To the United States Air Force, he is a living legend. During the Korean War, he was the crew chief for the 4th Fighter Wing. They didn't call him Mechanic. They called him the Ghost. Because he and his planes would go into places no one thought they could survive, and they would always, always, come back. The general took a step closer to Samuel, his voice softening with reverence. In the winter of 1952, during a mission over the Yalu River, Captain Miller's F-86 took a round to the engine. His fuel line was severed, engine choking, losing power over hostile territory. He was a dead man. But the Ghost was on the radio. He didn't quote a manual. He talked Miller through a procedure that didn't exist. He had him bypass 2 entire systems using nothing but his reserve throttle and a prayer. The general paused, letting the story sink in. But that's not the half of it. When Miller's crippled plane landed, it was still losing fuel. The engine wouldn't restart. They had another mission, a critical rescue operation, in less than an hour. The spare parts were a day away. Everyone said it was impossible. The plane was grounded. He pointed a finger, not at Samuel, but at the small tool in his hand. But Master Sergeant Vance didn't accept impossible. He found a hairline fracture in an injector nozzle, a flaw the manufacturer itself didn't know existed. There was no tool to fix it. So he made one. He took a piece of high-tensile steel wire from a wrecked MiG-15, ground it down on a whetstone for 2 hours in the freezing cold, and created this. The full flashback hit Samuel then, not as a memory, but as a sensory flood. The metallic taste of fear in his mouth. The burning cold of the steel in his bare fingers. The face of young Jimmy Miller, pale and shivering, watching him with the desperate hope of a man who had already accepted death. He remembered the final, delicate twist of the wire inside the engine's guts, the feeling of a tiny component clicking back into place. He remembered the roar of the engine catching, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. Jimmy had flown the mission. He had saved 3 downed pilots. He had come home. He used this tool, General Thompson continued, his voice thick with emotion, to reshape the damaged nozzle and clear the vapor lock. They called it the Ghost's Toothpick. That single act of ingenuity is now a mandatory case study in advanced engine diagnostics at the Air Force Academy. This man didn't just fix an engine. He wrote the book on how to do it. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of the city. Every person on the tarmac, every passenger at the window, was frozen, caught in the gravity of the revelation. General Thompson finally turned his gaze upon Kyle. The general's eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were filled with a cold, profound disappointment that was more withering than any rage. "You," the general said, the single word a crushing weight. "You, with your shiny uniform and your little tablet. You looked at this man and you saw a problem. An inconvenience. You saw his age, and you saw nothing else. You have been given the privilege of standing in the presence of greatness, and you tried to have it arrested." Kyle trembled, his face the color of ash. "Sir. I was just following protocol. Security regulations," he stammered, the words turning to dust in his mouth. "Protocol," the general scoffed, the sound like grinding stone. "Regulations. Those are guidelines for men without judgment. A real leader, a real man, knows when to look past the rule book and see the truth in front of him. The truth is, that engine has a problem you and your $5,000 toy couldn't find in a million years. And the truth is, the one man on this continent who could probably fix it with his bare hands was standing right in front of you, and you called him Grandpa." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are a disgrace. Not just to this airport, but to an entire generation of young people who think knowledge comes from a screen instead of from calloused hands and a lifetime of experience. You failed to show respect, and in doing so, you have failed at your one and only job." The rebuke was complete. It was a public execution of a man's ego, and Kyle simply wilted under the weight of it, his eyes fixed on the floor. General Thompson straightened up and turned back to Samuel. His demeanor softened instantly. "Master Sergeant Vance. Sir. Would you be willing to take a look?" Samuel finally looked away from Kyle. He looked at the general, then at the waiting aircraft. He gave another slow, deliberate nod. Escorted by the general himself, Samuel walked down the jet bridge and out onto the tarmac. The mechanics parted before him like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of shame and awe. He walked to the engine, the general holding a flashlight for him. Samuel didn't need it. He ran a gnarled hand over the smooth, cool surface of the cowling, then pointed. "There." A mechanic, following his gesture, peered at the spot. "Sir, that's just the manual release for the fuel line purge valve." "I know," Samuel said. He handed his canvas satchel to the general and then, with surprising agility, hoisted himself up onto the maintenance platform. He knelt, his old knees protesting with a faint crackle. He held up the Ghost's toothpick. To the stunned mechanics, he said simply, "The digital sensors close this valve. But the manual spring mechanism can get sticky in the heat. It doesn't close all the way. It leaves a gap. The width of a human hair. Not enough for a liquid leak, but enough for vapor to escape when the fuel pump primes. Enough to fool the computer. He slid the thin, hooked end of the wire into a tiny aperture next to the valve, a space so small it seemed impossible to access. He manipulated it for a moment, his touch impossibly delicate. There was a faint, metallic click, a sound almost too small to be heard. He withdrew the tool and nodded to the lead mechanic. "Try it now." The mechanic, his face pale, scrambled back toward the cockpit access panel. A moment later, he spoke into his headset. "Okay. Initiating start sequence." Again. There was a whine. A low rumble. A cough. And then, with a deep, soul-shaking roar, the GX 1B engine ignited. It screamed to life, a perfect, stable, powerful thrum that washed over the tarmac like a wave of absolution. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the passengers at the terminal window. The ground crew just stared, their mouths agape, at the old man kneeling on the platform, who simply watched the spinning blades with quiet satisfaction. It was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Kyle Evans was not fired. At Samuel's quiet request to the general, "The boy is young, he just needs to learn," he was instead demoted and reassigned. His new job was managing the baggage carts on the graveyard shift, a position of profound and humbling obscurity. The airport authority, under pressure from the military and the airline, instituted a new mandatory training program for all ground operations leads. It was a course in situational awareness and respect, and it was officially named the Vance Protocol. Weeks later, in the sterile, echoing halls of the airport's lower levels, a chance encounter occurred. Kyle, his once crisp uniform now replaced with a simple, grease-stained work shirt, was lining up a train of baggage carts. He looked up and saw Samuel Vance walking slowly toward him, on his way to another flight. Kyle froze. His first instinct was to look away, to hide his face in shame. But then he remembered the cold disappointment in the general's eyes, and the quiet dignity of the old man. He straightened up. As Samuel drew level, Kyle stopped his work. He stood at attention, as much as his civilian posture would allow. He looked the old man in the eye, and he gave a short, simple nod. It was not a gesture of subservience. It was a nod of pure, hard-won respect. Samuel Vance stopped walking. He looked at the young man, really looked at him for the first time without the filter of conflict. He saw the humility that had replaced the arrogance. He saw the lesson that had been learned. And he nodded back. Then, he turned and continued his slow, steady walk down the corridor, a quiet hero in a noisy world, leaving behind him a silence filled with the weight of a lesson taught, and a lesson learned. For true wisdom is not the absence of mistakes, but the grace to learn from them, and true strength is not the power to command, but the humility to serve.